Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something brutal, bloody, and absolutely insane. We're talking about gladiators. But forget Russell Crowe, forget the Hollywood glamour, forget the heroic death. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive your first month. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You've just woken up in ancient Rome around 100 AD. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're a gladiator, and your life expectancy is measured in fights, not years. Your bed isn't a bed. It's a stone platform in a cell, maybe 5 feet by 7 feet if you're lucky. There's straw scattered on top, probably unchanged for weeks, definitely crawling with lice and fleas. The smell hits you immediately. Sweat, blood, infection, human waste, and that distinctive metallic tang of fear that never quite leaves this place. You're in a ludus, a gladiator school and prison combined. The walls around you are thick stone, designed to keep you in and the world out. There are no windows, just a small barred opening near the ceiling that lets in a sliver of light and air. It's either freezing cold or suffocatingly hot, depending on the season. There's no temperature control. There's only survival. The cell is dark even during the day. At night, it's pitch black. You sleep when exhaustion finally claims you, and you wake when the guards bang their clubs against the bars. There's no alarm clock, no gentle wake-up call. Just metal on metal and shouting. Privacy? Forget it. You're sharing this space with 2 or 3 other gladiators. Men who are strangers, or worse, men you might have to fight one day. You sleep back to back, not out of trust, but because it's the only way to fit everyone in. You learn to sleep lightly because theft is common and violence can erupt at any moment. The floor is cold stone or packed earth. In winter, the cold seeps into your bones. In summer, the heat turns your cell into an oven. You're never comfortable, never truly rested. Your body aches constantly from yesterday's training, last week's fight, or the beating you took for not moving fast enough. Welcome to morning in the ludus, where every day starts with the question, will I survive today? So you've dragged yourself off the stone platform. Now nature calls. And in a gladiator school, even basic human functions are humiliating. There's no bathroom in your cell, no toilet, no privacy, no dignity. Instead, there's a communal latrine down the corridor, a long stone bench with holes cut into it, positioned over a channel of running water below. If you're lucky, the water is actually running. If you're not, you're staring into a cesspool of last week's contributions. You shuffle down the corridor with the other gladiators, all of you in various states of undress and desperation. The latrine is crowded. There's no such thing as personal space here. You sit shoulder to shoulder with men you barely know, all of you doing your business while trying not to make eye contact. The smell is apocalyptic. Imagine every bad bathroom experience you've ever had, multiply it by 50, and add the stench of bodies that haven't been properly washed in days. You breathe through your mouth and try to finish quickly. Toilet paper? Hilarious. You're using a sponge on a stick called a tersorium that's shared among everyone. It sits in a bucket of salt water or vinegar between uses. Yes, you read that correctly. Shared. You wipe yourself with the same sponge that 15 other men used this morning. Try not to think about it too much, or you'll go insane. In winter, the stone bench is freezing. Your exposed skin goes numb instantly. In summer, the heat makes the smell even worse if that's possible. Flies buzz everywhere. There's always someone with dysentery, which means the latrines are perpetually disgusting. And here's the thing that really drives it home. The latrines are supervised, Guards stand watch, not for your protection, but to make sure you're not plotting escape or rebellion. Even your most private moments are monitored. You're not a person here. You're property. Valuable property, maybe, but property nonetheless. Disease spreads fast in these conditions. Infections, parasites, digestive issues, they're just part of life. If you're lucky, your body adapts. If you're not, you die of something far less glamorous than combat. And you still haven't eaten breakfast, but we'll get to that next. You survived the latrine. Now it's time to eat. And just like everything else in the ludus, mealtime is a test of endurance. Breakfast is served in the communal dining area, a large room with long wooden tables and benches. Gladiators file in by group, separated by skill level and type. Rookies eat separately from veterans. Heavily armored fighters sit apart from the light. Fast ones. The hierarchy is brutal and unforgiving. The meal arrives in wooden bowls. It's porridge. Always porridge. Made from barley and beans, sometimes with a little bit of oil if the lanista, the owner of your school, is feeling generous. It's thick, grayy, and tastes like sadness, mixed with grit. There are no spices, no seasoning, just carbohydrates to keep you alive. This is the gladiator diet, high in carbs, low in protein. Why? Because your owners want you heavy. They want you to develop a layer of fat over your muscles, not because they're kind, but because fat protects your vital organs in combat. A sword, slash that cuts through fat might not reach your intestines. It's practical, not compassionate. On the side, you might get bread. Hard, dense bread that's been sitting around for days. You don't bite into it so much as gnaw at it like a rat. Sometimes there's a thin vegetable stew, mostly water with a few sad vegetables floating in it. Cabbage, leeks, onions, whatever was cheapest at the market. Meat? Rarely. Despite what you see in movies, gladiators don't feast on steaks and roasted chicken. Meat is expensive, and you're expensive enough to maintain without adding premium food to the budget. On special occasions before a big fight, you might get a small portion of pork or goat. But it's the exception, not the rule. What about drinks? You're drinking pasca, a mixture of water and sour wine, sometimes with herbs added. It's the drink of soldiers and slaves, cheap and somewhat safe since the wine kills some of the bacteria in the water. It tastes like vinegar and regret. You drink it anyway because dehydration will kill you faster than the arena. The weird thing? This diet actually works. Archaeological evidence from gladiator graveyards shows these men were well nourished, though not in the way we'd consider healthy today. They were carb-loaded, heavy and strong. Their bones show signs of repeated healing, good medical care, and intensive training. They were athletes, just not fed like modern ones. You eat quickly and in silence. Talking during meals can get you punished. The guards watch constantly, looking for any sign of trouble. Fights over food are common. A rookie who takes too much, a veteran who feels disrespected. Tensions can explode in seconds. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It fills the void in your stomach and gives you enough fuel to survive the morning. That's all it's designed to do. And now that you're fed, it's time for the real torture to begin. Training. Training starts early, and it doesn't stop until your muscles are screaming and your mind is broken. This is where gladiators are made, where slaves and criminals are transformed into killing machines. You file out into the training yard, a large dirt courtyard surrounded by high walls. The sun beats down mercilessly, or the rain turns the ground into mud. There's no postponing training for weather. The arena doesn't care if it's raining, so neither does your lanista. The training weapons are heavy, heavier than the real ones you'll use in the arena. Your wooden sword weighs twice what a gladius does. Your wooden shield is reinforced with lead. Why? To build strength. If you can fight with these weights, the real weapons will feel like toys. It's brutal but effective. Your day depends on what type of gladiator you are. And make no mistake, you don't choose. Your owners decide based on your body type, your skills, and what they think will sell tickets. If you're a Murmillo, You're the heavily armored type. You wear a full helmet with a distinctive fish crest, carry a large rectangular shield, and wield a gladius, the classic Roman short sword. You're slow but powerful. Your job is to overwhelm opponents with strength and defense. If you're a retiarius, you're the polar opposite. You fight with a trident and a weighted net, wearing minimal armor. You're fast, agile, and your whole strategy is to entangle your opponent and stab them while they're helpless. It's effective, but humiliating if you fail. A retiarius who loses badly is mocked mercilessly. Thrax gladiators use a curved sword and a small square shield. They're aggressive, offensive fighters who rely on speed and technique. Secutor gladiators are designed specifically to hunt retiari, with streamlined helmets that nets can't catch on. There are dozens of types, each with different equipment, tactics, and social status within the gladiator hierarchy. Some types are seen as noble, others are considered cheap entertainment. Training is run by doctors, experienced fighters who survived the arena and now teach. They're brutal instructors who accept nothing less than perfection. Mistakes are punished with beatings, humiliation, or extra training that leaves you barely able to walk. You practice strikes on wooden posts called pali, hour after hour. Thrust, withdraw, defend, repeat. Thousands of times until your arms feel like dead weight. The doctor walks behind you, correcting your stance with a wooden rod. If your form is wrong, you get hit. Hard. Then comes sparring. You face other trainees with wooden weapons fighting in the hot sun or pouring rain. It's not play fighting. Injuries are common. Broken bones, dislocations, concussions. They happen regularly. The doctors doesn't stop the fight unless someone is seriously hurt. Pain is a teacher. Between drills, you do conditioning. Running, jumping, lifting heavy stones, building the endurance to fight for 15 or 20 minutes in heavy armor under the Mediterranean sun. Most people can't comprehend how exhausting that is. Every muscle burns. Your lungs scream. But you keep going because stopping means punishment. Lunch is brief, more barley porridge and water, eaten standing up. Then it's back to training. More drills, more sparring, more conditioning. The afternoon sun is brutal, and there's no shade in the training yard. Heat exhaustion is common. If you collapse, you're dragged to the side and left to recover on your own. Training doesn't end until sunset, and even then, some gladiators stay to practice. The veterans know that every moment of training might be the difference between life and death in the arena. The rookies stay because they're terrified of their first fight and desperate to be ready. By the time you stumble back to your cell, you're destroyed. Your muscles are torn. Your skin is bruised and sunburned, and your mind is numb. You collapse onto your stone platform and pray for sleep. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. And the day after. And the day after. Until your body is a weapon, forged through suffering. Let's talk about the medical care, because surprisingly, gladiators received some of the best medical attention available in ancient Rome. But that doesn't mean it was pleasant. Your owners have invested significant money in you. The lanista paid for your purchase, your food, your training. You're an asset, and like any asset, you need to be maintained. Dead gladiators don't earn money. Enter the medicus, the gladiator doctor. These men were skilled physicians who specialized in trauma care. They had to be. Gladiators suffered injuries that would kill most people. Deep sword wounds, shattered bones, torn muscles, punctured organs. Archaeological evidence from gladiator cemeteries shows remarkable things. These men received surgical intervention. Bones were set properly and healed well. Wounds were cleaned and stitched. There's evidence of trepanation, drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure from head injuries. These weren't random hacks. These were skilled medical procedures. But here's what the movies don't show you. It hurt. Badly. There was no anesthesia, no painkillers beyond wine or opium, which was rare and expensive. If you needed surgery, you were held down by several strong men while the medicus cut into you with a bronze or iron scalpel. Imagine having a deep wound cleaned. The doctor uses wine or vinegar to wash it, which burns like fire. Then he might apply honey, which actually has antibacterial properties and works remarkably well. Finally, he stitches you up with thread made from animal gut, each stitch pulling through your flesh while you're fully conscious and aware. Broken bones are set by pulling the limb until the bone fragments align, then wrapping it tightly with cloth soaked in a mixture of egg whites, flour, and other binding agents that harden into a cast. The process is agonizing. If the bone was badly shattered or jutting through skin, amputation might be the only option. And yes, you're awake for that too. The medicus has tools that look like torture devices: bone saws, forceps, hooks to hold wounds open, cauteries, hot irons used to burn wounds closed. His workspace smells like blood, burnt flesh, and herbal poultices. But here's the surprising part. Many gladiators survived these treatments and fought again. The medical care, while brutal, was effective. The medicus knew anatomy from working on hundreds of wounded fighters. He knew which wounds were fatal and which weren't. He could often save men who would have died without intervention. Of course, infection was still a killer. Even with honey and wine, bacteria could take hold. Gangrene could set in. Fever could spike. The medicus did his best, but sometimes the body simply gave up. There was also sports medicine, Roman style, massages with olive oil to keep muscles loose, herbal baths to reduce inflammation, dietary adjustments for specific injuries. The ludus had a whole system designed to keep gladiators fighting ready. You weren't allowed to refuse treatment. If the medicus said you needed surgery, you got surgery. If he said you needed rest, you rested. But as soon as he cleared you, you were back in training. Your body was never truly your own. And here's the cruel irony. This excellent medical care existed not because anyone cared about you as a person, but because you were valuable property. A horse that wins races gets the best veterinary care. You were the same. So yes, gladiator medicine was advanced for its time, but never forget why. Now let's talk about what happens when training ends. Because gladiators weren't just fighters. They were celebrities, sex symbols, and the subject of obsessive fandom. In the evening, after training, some gladiators were allowed limited freedom within the ludus compound. There was a common area where fighters could socialize, gamble with dice or knucklebones, and try to maintain some semblance of humanity. Veteran gladiators commanded respect. They had survived multiple fights, earned their scars, and knew the arena's secrets. Rookies watched them like students studying masters, hoping to learn something that might save their lives. Friendships formed, though always with the shadow of the arena hanging over them. You might genuinely like the retiarius from Gaul who shares your dark humor. But if the editor, the man organizing the games, decides you'll fight each other, friendship means nothing. One of you will die, or both of you will be horribly wounded. Some ludus allowed conjugal visits. If you were successful and popular, you might be allowed to marry or at least have a woman visit. Children born from these unions were technically free, not slaves, which gave some gladiators hope for a legacy beyond the arena. But here's where it gets weird. Roman women were obsessed with gladiators. Upper-class women, married to wealthy senators, would send perfumed love letters to gladiators. Some would bribe guards for private meetings. There are historical accounts of Roman women from elite families having affairs with gladiators, despite the massive social stigma. Why? The danger, the violence, the forbidden nature of it all. Gladiators were slaves, the lowest social class, but they were also celebrities who fought and survived. The contrast was intoxicating to some. Graffiti from Pompeii shows this obsession. One inscription calls a gladiator the heartthrob of all the girls. Another declares a specific fighter made the girls sigh. These weren't anonymous warriors. They were known by name, celebrated, fantasized about. Gladiators were marketed like modern athletes. Successful fighters had fans who followed their careers, bought merchandise, and bet fortunes on their matches. Their images appeared on pottery, mosaics, and lamps. Children played with toy gladiators. It was the ultimate parasocial relationship. Some gladiators became wealthy from gifts and prize money. A successful fighter could earn enough to buy his freedom and retire. But most never made it that far. Most died in the arena or lived just long enough to be too broken to fight anymore. At night, you lie in your cell and think about freedom. It's not impossible. Some gladiators earned their rudies, a wooden sword symbolizing discharge from service. It was the ultimate goal, the dream that kept you fighting. But for every gladiator who earned freedom, 100 died trying. And you know the odds. You've seen the bodies carried out. You've watched men you trained with die in front of thousands of cheering Romans. Sleep doesn't come easy. When it does, you dream of the arena, the sand, the crowd, the weight of the weapon in your hand, and you wake up knowing that soon, very soon, those dreams will become reality. Fight day. This is what everything has been building toward. Today, you'll walk into the amphitheater and fight for your life in front of thousands of screaming Romans. You wake before dawn, but you haven't really slept. Your stomach is twisted in knots. Fear is a living thing in your chest, cold and heavy. Around you, other gladiators who are scheduled to fight today are equally quiet. Everyone deals with fear differently. Some pray to their gods. Some sharpen their weapons obsessively. Some just stare at nothing, already resigned. Breakfast is lighter than usual. The last thing you want is a full stomach if you're going to be running and fighting. You force down some bread and watered wine, knowing you need the energy but unable to taste anything past the fear. The guards come earlier than usual. It's time. You're shackled and led out of the ludus with the other fighters, a grim procession through Rome's streets. Citizens watch you pass. Some cheer. Some place last-minute bets. You're walking to your potential death and they're entertained by it. The amphitheater looms ahead. If you're fighting in the Colosseum, it's massive, capable of holding 50,000 spectators. Even smaller amphitheaters hold thousands. The roar of the crowd is audible from blocks away, a constant wave of noise that grows louder as you approach. You're taken to the hippodrome, the underground area beneath the arena floor. It's a maze of corridors, cells, and mechanical lifts. Animal cages line the walls, and you can hear lions, bears, and other beasts that will be released for the animal hunts. The smell is overpowering. Animal waste, blood, sweat, and fear. You're given your equipment. If you're a murmillo, you receive your helmet, shield, arm guard, and leg greave. The helmet is heavy, with small eye holes that restrict your vision. It's hot inside, and breathing is difficult. But it's also protection, and you're grateful for it. The armor is inspected to ensure its regulation. The weapons are checked. Everything must be fair, at least by Roman standards. The editor wants a good show, and a fighter with defective equipment doesn't provide entertainment. Other gladiators are going through the same process. You recognize some from your ludus. Others are strangers from rival schools. Everyone is silent now, lost in their own thoughts. The time for bravado has passed. A doctor gives final instructions. Remember your training. Watch your opponent's eyes. Control your breathing. Protect your left side. Fight smart, not just hard. His voice is calm, almost soothing. He's seen hundreds of men go through this. Some came back, many didn't. Then the wait. This is the worst part. Hours sometimes, as the morning spectacles unfold above. First come the animal hunts, where exotic beasts are slaughtered by specialized hunters. Then the executions, where criminals are killed in elaborate theatrical ways. Sometimes they're torn apart by animals. Sometimes they're forced to reenact mythological deaths. It's savage, and it's meant to be. You can hear everything through the floor above. The crowd's reactions, the animal roars, the screams. Each sound hammers home what's coming. Finally, a guard appears. It's time. Your group is called. You're led to a lift, a wooden platform operated by pulleys and slaves. The platform rises slowly, and suddenly you're emerging through the arena floor into blinding sunlight. The roar of 50,000 people hits you like a physical force. It's overwhelming, impossible to process. The arena floor is covered in fresh sand to absorb blood. The sun is brutal. The heat inside your helmet is suffocating. You're paraded around the arena with the other gladiators, walking past the Emperor's box if he's attending, or the sponsor's seats. The crowd evaluates you like livestock. They cheer for favorites, boo unknown rookies. Bets are being placed right now based on how you walk, how you carry your weapon, how confident you look. Then comes the moment everyone remembers from history, the salute. You stop before the sponsor of the games and raise your weapon. The words come automatically, drilled into you through repetition. We who are about to die salute you. Except here's the thing. Historians debate whether this phrase was actually used regularly, or if it was recorded from a single event and blown out of proportion. But it doesn't matter right now. What matters is that the statement is true, regardless of whether you speak it. You are about to fight. You might die. And all of this is for their entertainment. The gladiators are matched up. You learn who you're fighting. Maybe it's someone you know. Maybe it's a complete stranger. Either way, in moments, one of you will be bleeding into the sand. The fight begins. The editor signals. The crowd roars. And suddenly, it's not about glory or honor or anything noble. It's about survival. Your opponent moves, and instinct takes over. All those hours of training, all those drills, they activate automatically. Time becomes strange in the arena. Seconds stretch into eternities. Everything moves too fast and too slow simultaneously. You're aware of every detail. The weight of your weapon, the burning in your lungs, the restriction of your helmet, the roar of the crowd reduced to background noise. Your opponent is trying to kill you. This isn't sparring. This is real. The first exchange happens in a blur. Weapons clash. You feel the impact vibrate through your arms. Sand kicks up around your feet as you circle each other, looking for openings. If you're a heavily armored fighter facing a light one, your strategy is to use your shield, to force close combat where your armor is an advantage. You press forward, trying to back your opponent against the arena wall where they can't use their speed. If you're the light fighter, you have to move. Constantly. Never let the heavy fighter set. Use your speed, your agility. Make them chase you. Wear them down. Wait for them to make a mistake. The crowd reacts to every move. A good strike brings cheers. A stumble brings mocking laughter. They're not watching two men fight for their lives. They're watching a show, and you're the actor who might die if the performance is bad. Fatigue sets in faster than you expected. The adrenaline that carried you through the first minute burns off, and now you're fighting with increasingly heavy limbs. The heat is unbearable. Sweat pours into your eyes. Your lungs scream for air, but the helmet restricts every breath. Then it happens. Maybe you make a mistake. Maybe your opponent is just better. Maybe luck runs out. You feel a blade slip past your defense. Pain explodes through your body, bright and all-consuming. Blood soaks into your tunic. The crowd's roar intensifies. If you're badly wounded, you have one option: appeal for mercy. You drop your weapon and raise a finger to the crowd, signaling submission. Your life now depends on the editor's decision, influenced by the crowd's reaction. If you fought well, if you showed courage and skill, the crowd might cheer for mercy. They'll wave handkerchiefs, gesture with thumbs, and shout for your life to be spared. The Paulus Verso, the famous thumbs up or down, probably wasn't literal, but the concept was real. The crowd indicated their preference, and the editor made the final call. If you fought poorly, if you showed cowardice or gave a boring performance, the crowd wants blood. They'll shout for your death, and the editor, wanting to please his audience, will likely oblige. Here's the dark reality. Most gladiator fights didn't end in death. It was too expensive to constantly replace trained fighters. Many fights ended with submission and mercy, but enough ended in death to keep the stakes real. Roughly 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 fights resulted in a fatality, depending on the time period and the type of games. If you're granted mercy, attendants rush out to help you. You're carried from the arena to the medical area, where the medicus will try to save your life. If your wounds are survivable, you'll live to fight another day. If mercy is denied, your opponent is ordered to finish you. The final blow is meant to be quick, a sword through the throat or heart. You're supposed to face death bravely, without begging or crying out. Your final moments are public, performed for thousands. Attendants dressed as Karen, the ferryman of the dead, come to check if you're really dead, sometimes hitting your head with a hammer to make sure. Your body is dragged from the arena, leaving a long trail of blood in the sand. Fresh sand is raked over the bloodstains, and the next fight begins. If you survive, if you win, you're escorted out of the arena to thunderous applause. You're alive. You've earned prize money, maybe a palm branch symbolizing victory. You're a hero for a day. But you're not free. You go back to the ludus, back to your cell, back to training, because there will be another fight, and another, until eventually your luck runs out. Let's talk about something the movies never show you. What happens to your mind when you're a gladiator? Because the physical trauma is only half the story. You are living in a constant state of anticipatory dread. Even on days when you're not fighting, you know another fight is coming. You've seen men die. You've probably killed men yourself. That doesn't just disappear from your mind when you go to sleep. Modern soldiers call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We have names for it now, treatment options, understanding. In ancient Rome, they had nothing. You were expected to be strong, to endure, to fight again and again without breaking. But people did break. Historical records mention gladiators who refused to fight, who had to be beaten and threatened into the arena. Some killed themselves rather than face another fight. Suicide was common enough that ludus schools had to take precautions. Cells were designed to prevent hanging. Sharp objects were carefully controlled. There's a famous account of 29 Saxon prisoners who were scheduled to be executed as gladiators. The night before, they strangled each other rather than provide entertainment for Romans. One man, left alive, smashed his own head against a wall until he died. That's the level of desperation we're talking about. Death was preferable to the arena. The psychological torture of being property, of having no control over your life or death, of knowing that your suffering entertains others. It's impossible to fully comprehend unless you've experienced it. You're not a person. You're a thing that fights. Friendships become complicated. Can you truly befriend someone you might have to kill? Some gladiators remained aloof, building emotional walls to protect themselves. Others formed deep bonds, finding humanity and connection despite the circumstances. But those bonds made everything worse when you watched friends die, or worse, had to fight them yourself. There are accounts of gladiators who refused to kill friends, who would rather die themselves than strike the final blow. Sometimes they were both executed for refusing to fight. The crowd wanted blood, and if you didn't provide it, you became the entertainment. Sleep was probably terrible for most gladiators. Nightmares, anxiety, hypervigilance. Your body never fully relaxes because danger is always present. Even in your cell, violence can erupt. Other gladiators might attack over perceived slights. Guards might beat you for minor infractions. Some turned to religion for comfort. Gladiators would pray to Mars, the god of war, or Nemesis, goddess of revenge and retribution. There are altars and inscriptions from gladiators asking the gods for protection, victory, or simply a clean death. Others found escape in whatever vices were available: gambling, sex when possible, drinking whatever alcohol they could obtain, anything to dull the constant fear and trauma. And the strangest part? Some gladiators, after earning their freedom, chose to return to the arena. Not because they loved fighting, but because the ludus was all they knew. Freedom was terrifying in its own way. At least in the ludus, you knew the rules. You knew your purpose. Freedom meant facing a world that still saw you as a former slave, a killer, someone to be feared and shunned. The psychological damage of being a gladiator was permanent. Even if you survived and earned freedom, you carried the arena with you forever. The violence, the deaths, the cheering crowds. It became part of your identity, impossible to escape. So yes, gladiators were warriors, but they were also traumatized human beings, forced into circumstances beyond their control, surviving day by day in a system designed to break them. Now let's talk about who actually became gladiators, because the path to the arena was rarely voluntary. The majority of gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war from Rome's endless conquests, criminals sentenced to the arena as punishment, sometimes just unlucky people sold into slavery by circumstances or debt. When Rome conquered a region, thousands of prisoners would be enslaved. The strongest, most physically capable men were often marked for gladiator training. They were valuable. A strong slave could work fields or mines, but a strong slave with combat training could earn fortunes for their owner in the arena. Criminals faced different sentences based on their crimes. Minor offenses might result in slavery or hard labor. Serious crimes, especially those that embarrassed or challenged Roman authority, often resulted in damnatio ad gladium, condemnation to the sword. You were sent to the ludus to be trained and then killed in the arena. It was a death sentence with entertainment value. Some criminals were condemned ad bestias, to the beasts. These people weren't trained as gladiators. They were simply thrown into the arena with lions, bears, or other predators. It was execution as public spectacle, brutal and quick. But here's where it gets complicated. Some gladiators were volunteers, free men who, for various desperate reasons, chose this life. They were called auctorati, and they signed contracts agreeing to gladiator service. Why would anyone volunteer? Usually, debt. Gambling losses, failed businesses, legal troubles. Rome had no bankruptcy protection. If you owed money you couldn't pay, slavery was often the result. Some men chose gladiator school as a way to earn enough money to pay their debts and maybe survive. Others were drawn by the fame and potential wealth. A successful gladiator could become incredibly famous. Prize money from victories, gifts from wealthy admirers, and the slim possibility of earning enough to buy freedom and retire wealthy. It was a lottery with terrible odds, but for someone with no other options, it was still a chance. The volunteers signed contracts that were legally binding and horrifying. They swore an oath to be burned by fire, bound in chains, beaten by rods, and killed by steel. They literally agreed to forfeit their human rights, to become property, all for the chance at glory and money. Even free volunteers were treated as slaves once they entered the ludus. The contract didn't protect you from beatings, harsh conditions, or death. You were property until your contract expired or you died, whichever came first. There were also rare cases of women gladiators. Yes, they existed, though they were much less common than men. Female gladiators, called gladiatrices, fought in some games, usually as novelty acts. They were sensationalized, sexualized, and often considered scandalous. Emperor Septimius Severus eventually banned women from the arena in the early 3rd century, calling it disgraceful. But before that ban, there's archaeological and historical evidence of women fighting. A relief sculpture from the 2nd century shows 2 female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea, both granted mercy after their fight. Whether slave, criminal, or volunteer, everyone who entered the gladiator life faced the same brutal reality. You were no longer fully human in Roman eyes. You were infamies, disgraced. Even if you were a successful, wealthy gladiator, you were still socially beneath free Roman citizens. You couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't truly integrate into society. Your children, if you had any, carried the stigma of your profession. Former gladiators struggled to find acceptance, even after freedom. You were marked forever. So when you think about gladiators, remember, most didn't choose this. They were forced into it by conquest, crime, or desperation. They fought because the alternative was death or something worse, and they carried that burden until their final day. Let's talk about the business of death. Because gladiator games weren't just entertainment. They were a massive industry, a complex economic system built on blood. At the top was the editor, the sponsor of the games, usually a wealthy politician or the emperor himself. Hosting games was how you gained popularity, showed your wealth, and climbed the political ladder. The bigger and bloodier your games, the more the people loved you. Organizing games cost a fortune. You had to pay for the gladiators, either renting them from a lanista or buying them outright. You had to pay for the venue, the animal hunts, the executions, the elaborate stage effects, the awnings to shade the crowd, the food and water distributed to spectators. A major event could bankrupt a wealthy family or cost the imperial treasury enormous sums. But it was worth it politically. Julius Caesar spent so much on games that he went deep into debt, but the public adoration helped propel him to power. Emperors used games to distract citizens from political problems, economic troubles, or military losses. Bread and circuses, as the poet Juvenal cynically put it. Feed them and entertain them, and they won't revolt. The lanista, the gladiator school owner, was a businessman. He bought slaves and criminals, trained them, housed them, fed them, provided medical care, and then rented them out for games. His profit came from rental fees and prize money. A successful gladiator could earn his lanista massive wealth. But it was a risky business. Gladiators could die, wiping out your investment. They could be permanently injured. They could attempt escape. The lanista had to balance keeping his fighters alive with making them tough enough to win. Too soft, and they'd die in the arena. Too harsh, and they'd die in training. Insurance existed in ancient Rome, and lanistas could insure their most valuable gladiators. If an insured gladiator died in the arena, the lanista received compensation from the editor who hired him. It was literally death insurance for human property. Betting was enormous. Romans bet on everything: which gladiator would win, how long the fight would last, what type of wound would end it. Fortunes changed hands in the stands. Some people became wealthy from smart bets. Others lost everything on a favorite who fell in the first minute. The arena itself was an economic engine. Vendors sold food, drinks, and souvenirs. Prostitutes worked the crowds. Pickpockets thrived in the chaos. It was like a modern stadium event, except the main attraction was people dying. Gladiator merchandise was everywhere. Oil lamps decorated with famous fighters, pottery showing arena scenes, miniature figurines children played with. Even gladiator sweat was collected and sold as an aphrodisiac. Yes, you read that correctly. Wealthy Romans, particularly women, would buy vials of gladiator sweat and oil, believing it had erotic and magical properties. The body parts of dead gladiators were also valuable. Their blood was thought to cure epilepsy, so it was collected and sold. Pieces of their equipment became good luck charms. Everything was commodified. And then there were the animals. Exotic beasts from across the empire and beyond. Lions from Africa, bears from northern Europe, elephants, rhinoceros, crocodiles, leopards. Catching, transporting, and maintaining these animals cost enormous sums. Many died in transport. Those that survived were kept in special facilities until they were released into the arena to fight each other or be hunted by specialized fighters called venatores. Tens of thousands of animals died in the arena over the centuries. At the Colosseum's inauguration, Emperor Titus held games lasting 100 days. 9,000 animals were killed. It was ecological devastation for entertainment. The entire system was built on exploitation. Slaves had no rights. Animals were tortured for amusement. The poor could barely afford to attend, but were given free seats and sometimes free food to keep them pacified. The wealthy sat in luxury boxes, protected from the sun and the blood. It was a society that had normalized violence to an extraordinary degree. Death was entertainment. Suffering was spectacle. And everyone profited, except those dying in the sand. Now let's talk about the Colosseum itself, because this monument to violence was an engineering marvel and a symbol of Roman power. The Flavian Amphitheater, later called the Colosseum, was completed in 80 AD under Emperor Titus. It could hold 50,000 spectators, maybe more depending on how tightly they packed in. It was the largest amphitheater in the Roman world, a statement of imperial dominance visible from across the city. The structure was revolutionary, 4 stories tall, built from limestone, concrete, and brick. The exterior featured 3 levels of arches decorated with columns in different classical styles. It was beautiful in a brutal way, elegant architecture housing savage entertainment. Entering the Colosseum was an experience designed to overwhelm. There were 80 entrances at ground level, numbered so spectators could find their seats. Your social status determined where you sat. The emperor and senators occupied the best seats closest to the action. Equestrians, the wealthy business class, sat above them. Common citizens filled the upper levels. Women and the lowest classes were relegated to the very top. The worst seats with terrible views and no shade. The seating was marble, stone benches that were uncomfortable for the hours-long events. Wealthier patrons brought cushions. The poor just suffered. Above the seats, sailors from the Roman Navy operated the velarium, a massive retractable awning made from canvas. It shaded most of the spectators from the brutal Mediterranean sun, a feat of engineering requiring ropes, pulleys, and dozens of men working in perfect coordination. But the real genius was underground. The hypodium, the network of tunnels and chambers beneath the arena floor, was a masterpiece of stagecraft. There were cells for gladiators and animals, mechanical lifts to raise them to the arena floor, trap doors for surprise entrances, and even plumbing for water effects. The lifts were operated by slaves turning capstans, raising wooden platforms through shafts in the arena floor. Imagine being a gladiator in the dark tunnels. Then suddenly the platform rises, and you emerge into blinding sunlight and deafening noise. It was theatrical, designed for maximum dramatic impact. The arena floor itself was wooden, covered with sand. The Latin word for sand, harina, is where we get the English word arena. The sand absorbed blood, was easy to rake clean between events, and provided decent footing for fighters. Sometimes the arena was flooded for naval battles called naumachii. Early in the Colosseum's history, before the hypodium was fully built, they could fill the arena with water and stage ship battles with real vessels. It was absurdly extravagant and incredibly popular. The Colosseum also had excellent acoustics. 50,000 people could hear the announcements, the clang of weapons, the roar of animals. The noise must have been overwhelming, a constant wall of sound that made thinking almost impossible. Safety wasn't much of a concern for spectators, but they did have some protection. A high wall with metal rollers separated the lowest seats from the arena floor, preventing animals from climbing up and attacking the crowd. Archers stood ready to shoot any animal that got too close to spectators. The Colosseum operated for nearly 400 years. Thousands upon thousands died there. Gladiators, criminals, animals, all in the name of entertainment. It became synonymous with Roman culture, both its achievements and its cruelty. When Rome fell and the games ended, the Colosseum was abandoned. For centuries it was used as a quarry. People stripped away the marble, the metal fittings, the valuable materials. Earthquakes damaged it. Nature reclaimed parts of it, but it never fully disappeared. It stood as a monument to what Rome had been. And today, it's one of the most recognizable structures on Earth, a UNESCO World Heritage Site visited by millions. People walk through it now and take selfies. They imagine the gladiators, the lions, the drama. But they can't smell the blood, can't hear the screams, can't feel the terror of being dragged through those tunnels, knowing you might never leave. The Colosseum is a beautiful ruin now, but never forget what it was: a factory of death, engineered for maximum efficiency and entertainment. We've talked a lot about men, but the Roman arena had women too, and their stories are complicated, disturbing, and largely forgotten. Female gladiators, gladiatrices, existed. We have archaeological evidence, historical references, and artistic depictions. They fought in some games, though far less commonly than men. They were controversial even in ancient Rome, seen by many as scandalous and inappropriate. Why did women fight? Some were slaves who had no choice, just like male gladiators. They were forced into training and combat because their owners thought it would be profitable or entertaining. The novelty of women fighting added an exotic element to the games. Some may have been volunteers, though this is debated. Free women choosing gladiator life would have been even more scandalous than free men doing so. But Rome was a place of extremes, and it's possible some women were desperate enough or drawn to the fame. The famous relief from Halicarnassus shows two female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea. They're depicted in full gladiator gear, fighting with swords and shields. The inscription indicates both were granted honorable discharge, missio, meaning they fought well enough that neither was required to die. This suggests they were skilled, trained fighters, not just novelty acts. Literary sources mention female gladiators with mixed reactions. Some Roman writers were fascinated, others disgusted. Juvenal, the satirist, mocked upper-class women who trained as gladiators, suggesting it was a symptom of moral decay. Suetonius mentions that Emperor Domitian enjoyed watching women fight, and sometimes staged nighttime combats by torchlight. But Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from the arena in 200 AD, declaring it disgraceful. His edict suggests that female gladiators had become common enough to require an official prohibition. Were these fights to the death? Probably not. Usually. Female gladiator combats may have been more about spectacle than bloodshed, though injuries and deaths surely occurred. The novelty was the transgression itself. Women engaging in violence, in a public sexualized display. And it was sexualized. Make no mistake. The Romans who watched women fight weren't just interested in combat skill. There was a voyeuristic, erotic element. Women fighting, sweating, possibly being wounded or stripped of armor, it played into both violence and sexuality. Beyond gladiatrices, women were involved in the arena in other ways. Female criminals were executed there, often in sexually degrading ways. They might be raped before execution, or killed in ways that exposed their bodies. It was cruelty compounded with sexual violence, entertainment at its most depraved. Women in the crowd had their own complicated relationship with the games. Upper-class women attended regularly, though they sat in the worst seats, far from the action. This was ostensibly about modesty and propriety, keeping women separated from the blood and violence. But it was really about status and control. Those same upper-class women were often obsessed with male gladiators. They'd send gifts, letters, and money. Some arranged affairs, risking their reputations for the thrill of being with these dangerous, forbidden men. Roman moralists condemned this behavior as evidence of female licentiousness, but it persisted because the attraction was powerful. Female slaves worked the arena too, as vendors, as cleaners, as prostitutes servicing the crowds. The arena was an economic opportunity for some, a place of exploitation for others, usually both simultaneously. The women who fought and died in the arena are mostly forgotten. We don't know their stories, their names beyond the rare inscriptions, their thoughts and fears. They were considered even less important than male gladiators, who were already considered disposable. But they existed. They fought. They bled and died for Roman entertainment. And then, history mostly erased them, until archaeologists started uncovering the evidence of their existence. It's a reminder that the arena's cruelty didn't discriminate. It consumed everyone it touched, regardless of gender. Let's talk about the aftermath. What happened when you actually survived long enough to earn your freedom? If you were incredibly skilled, incredibly lucky, and incredibly durable, you might fight enough times to earn your rudis, the wooden sword that symbolized freedom from gladiator service. It was rare. Most gladiators died or were permanently crippled long before reaching this point. The rudis ceremony was public, often conducted in the arena itself. The editor would present you with the wooden sword in front of the crowd. It was a moment of triumph, the ultimate goal of every gladiator. You were no longer property. You were free. But freedom came with complications. You were technically free, but you were infamous, socially disgraced. Your time as a gladiator marked you permanently. You couldn't hold public office, couldn't serve in the military, couldn't fully integrate into respectable Roman society. Many freed gladiators had no useful skills beyond fighting. Combat doesn't translate well to civilian life. Some became trainers, doctors, teaching the next generation of gladiators. They knew the arena intimately and could prepare others for what they'd face. Others became bodyguards for wealthy Romans. Your reputation as a gladiator, your combat skills, made you valuable protection. But you were still seen as a thug, hired muscle, not a respectable person. Some ex-gladiators opened businesses, usually taverns or small shops. If you'd been successful and saved your prize money, you might have enough capital to start something. But even then, your past followed you. People knew who you were, what you'd done. A few became quite wealthy. The most famous gladiators, those who'd become household names, could leverage their fame. They might secure wealthy patrons, marry well, or invest wisely. But these were exceptions. Most ex-gladiators struggled to survive in a world that had no place for them. And here's the strange thing. Some returned to the arena, not because they loved it, but because it was all they knew. Freedom was terrifying. In the ludus, life was brutal, but structured. You knew your purpose. Outside, you were adrift, trying to find meaning in a society that despised you. There are records of freed gladiators who signed new contracts, choosing to fight again, sometimes for money, sometimes because the applause, the fame, the intensity of combat was the only thing that made them feel alive. They were addicted to it, unable to adjust to normal life. The psychological damage of being a gladiator didn't end with freedom. The trauma, the violence, the deaths you'd witnessed and caused, it all stayed with you. You'd wake up at night hearing the crowds roar, feeling the weight of the helmet, remembering the look in an opponent's eyes as you killed them. Some ex-gladiators left Rome entirely, traveling to distant provinces where their past might be unknown. They'd reinvent themselves, taking new names, new identities, but you can never fully escape your history. Death came eventually, of course. Even freed gladiators didn't live long by modern standards. The years of combat took their toll. Chronic injuries, organ damage from old wounds, the accumulated trauma of constant violence, all of it shortened your lifespan. When an ex-gladiator died, their funeral might be attended by fans who remembered their fights. Epitaphs sometimes mentioned their gladiator career with pride, listing victories and memorable combats. Others tried to erase that part of their past, their tombstones making no mention of the arena. Freedom was supposed to be the dream, the goal that kept you fighting. But for many, it was just another form of imprisonment. You'd escaped the ludus, but the ludus never truly left you. Now let's talk about the end. Not your personal end, but the end of the entire gladiator system. Because all things, even institutions built on centuries of tradition, eventually collapse. The gladiator games lasted for roughly 700 years, from the 3rd century BC to the 5th century AD. They survived the Republic, thrived under the Empire, and only ended when Rome itself was falling apart. Christianity's rise changed everything. Early Christians were horrified by the games. The casual violence, the celebration of death, the worship of blood sport. It contradicted everything they believed. Christians were often martyred in the arena, killed for their faith in front of cheering crowds. This created a deep cultural opposition to the entire institution. As Christianity became more powerful, influential church leaders began condemning the games. They called them pagan, barbaric, sinful. They pressured Christian emperors to limit or ban them. The turning point came on January 1st, 404 AD. A monk named Telemachus, appalled by the gladiator games, rushed into the arena in Rome and tried to stop the fight. He stood between the gladiators, pleading for the violence to end. The crowd was enraged. They stoned him to death in the arena. But Emperor Honorius, moved by Telemachus' sacrifice, issued an edict banning gladiator combats. The games that had defined Roman entertainment for centuries were officially over. Except it wasn't quite that simple. The ban was on gladiator fights specifically. Animal hunts continued for another century. Some regions ignored the ban, hosting illegal games. The cultural shift took time. But the gladiator system was dying anyway. Rome was collapsing. The Western Empire was fragmenting under barbarian invasions, economic collapse, and internal chaos. There was no money for extravagant games. The infrastructure was crumbling. The Colosseum itself was damaged by earthquakes and neglected. The ludus schools closed. Gladiators were freed or sold off. The industry that had employed thousands simply ceased to exist. The last generation of gladiators faded into history, their skills no longer needed or valued. By the mid-5th century, the games were truly over. The Colosseum stood empty. Wild animals roamed the arena floor where men had once fought. Nature began reclaiming the structure. Looking back, it's strange how such a brutal tradition lasted so long. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a release valve for societal violence, a display of imperial power, a political tool, and a deeply ingrained cultural institution. Modern people sometimes judge Romans harshly for their bloodlust. And yes, the games were horrific by our standards. But every society has its blind spots, its accepted cruelties that future generations will condemn. Romans saw the arena as normal, as exciting, as necessary. When the games ended, something was lost and something was gained. Lost was a form of entertainment that had brought joy, however twisted, to millions. Gained was a society that no longer treated human death as a spectator sport. The gladiators themselves, those final fighters, probably felt relief. No more training, no more fear, no more fighting for the amusement of others. They could live out their days in relative peace, even if freedom came only because the system that enslaved them had collapsed. The arena fell silent. The crowd dispersed for the last time. And the age of the gladiator ended not with glory, but with a whimper, fading into memory as Rome itself crumbled. So what's the legacy? What did the gladiators leave behind? First, an incredible archaeological record. Amphitheaters dot the former Roman Empire. The Colosseum still stands, damaged but enduring. Smaller arenas in cities across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East survive as ruins or tourist sites. We found gladiator graveyards with hundreds of bodies. Their bones tell stories of repeated injuries, skilled medical intervention, and violent deaths. Some skulls show evidence of fatal blows. Others show healed fractures from previous fights. The skeletons are a testament to lives lived in constant combat. Artistic depictions are everywhere. Mosaics showing arena scenes. Graffiti naming favorite fighters. Pottery decorated with gladiators. Sculptures and reliefs capturing combat poses. These images spread across the empire, showing how deeply the games penetrated Roman culture. We have written accounts from historians like Suetonius, Tacitus, and Dio Cassius. We have satirical commentary from Juvenal. We have architectural texts describing amphitheater construction. The gladiator world is well documented compared to many ancient practices. Linguistically, the arena left its mark. Words like arena itself, gladiator, even phrases that survive in modified form. The cultural imagery of the gladiator as a symbol of courage, skill, and doomed heroism persists in modern consciousness. The gladiator has become an archetype, the warrior who fights impossible odds, the slave who dreams of freedom, the entertainer whose life depends on the crowd's approval. These themes appear in countless stories, films, and games. Movies from Spartacus to Gladiator have romanticized and dramatized gladiator life. They're not entirely accurate, but they keep the memory alive. Millions of people who know nothing about ancient Rome can visualize a gladiator because of these cultural products. Video games let players experience simulated gladiator combat. Historical reenactors study gladiator fighting techniques, recreating the training and combat styles based on ancient evidence. The fascination continues, but the legacy is also a warning. The gladiator games show what happens when a society becomes desensitized to violence, when entertainment demands ever more extreme spectacles, when human life becomes cheap and disposable. Rome's greatest mistake wasn't the games themselves. It was the mentality that made them possible. The belief that some lives matter less, that suffering can be entertainment, that violence is acceptable if it's sanctioned by authority and cheered by crowds. We like to think we've evolved past that. But have we? We watch violence constantly on screens. We consume true crime as entertainment. We dehumanize people who are different from us. The mechanisms aren't identical, but the impulses remain. The gladiators force us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, about entertainment, about what we're willing to accept for the sake of spectacle. Their lives and deaths are a mirror, reflecting our own capacity for cruelty and our ability to rationalize it. Every gladiator who died in the sand was a person, someone's son or daughter, someone with hopes, fears, dreams that were never realized. They weren't characters in a story. They were real human beings ground up by a system that valued them only as performers of violence. Remembering them means acknowledging that, not romanticizing them as noble heroes, but recognizing them as victims of institutional brutality who occasionally found courage and dignity despite their circumstances. Their legacy is complex, fascinating and horrifying in equal measure, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both extraordinary achievement and casual cruelty. So here we are at the end of our journey. You've walked in a gladiator's footsteps from the brutal wake-up in the ludus cell to the roar of the crowd in the arena. You've felt the fear, the pain, the slim hope of freedom, and the crushing reality of a life not your own. What have we learned? That gladiators were more than Hollywood's version. They were slaves and criminals, desperate volunteers and trained killers. They were celebrities and property. They were human beings caught in a system designed to exploit them until they broke. Their daily life was harsh beyond modern comprehension. The food was terrible. The training was torturous. The medical care was advanced but agonizing. The psychological toll was immense and permanent. And through it all, the arena waited, demanding blood. The crowds cheered, not because Romans were inherently more evil than us, but because their culture had normalized violence as entertainment. They'd been conditioned to see gladiators as something less than fully human, which made their suffering acceptable. The gladiators themselves displayed remarkable courage. They fought when they could have refused and died. They trained when they could have given up. They found friendship and humanity in the darkest circumstances. They survived, sometimes for years in conditions that would destroy most people immediately. Some earned their freedom and lived to tell their stories. Most didn't. Most died young, their bodies broken, their names forgotten by everyone except maybe the fans who'd bet on their fights. The gladiator system was a machine that consumed people. It took prisoners of war, criminals, and desperate volunteers and transformed them into weapons for public amusement. It was efficient, profitable, and sustained for centuries because enough people benefited from it to keep it running. When it finally ended, it was less about moral awakening and more about practical collapse. Rome was falling. There was no money. Christianity provided an ideological excuse, but the games were dying anyway. Systems end when they're no longer sustainable, not necessarily when they're recognized as wrong. What remains is memory, architecture, and questions. The Colosseum stands as a monument to both Roman engineering genius and Roman moral blindness. You can't separate the two. The beauty and the horror are intertwined. If you visit Rome today and stand in the Colosseum, try to imagine it full. 50,000 people screaming, the smell of blood and sand, the heat of the Mediterranean sun, a gladiator stumbling, wounded, looking up at the crowd to see if they'll let him live. And then imagine being that gladiator, not observing from safety, but living it, knowing that your death is entertainment, that your pain means nothing except as a spectacle, that you'll be forgotten as soon as the next fight begins. That was real. It happened to real people repeatedly for hundreds of years. We tell ourselves we're better now, more civilized, more humane. And in many ways we are. But the capacity for cruelty hasn't disappeared. It's just been redirected, sanitized, made easier to ignore. The gladiators teach us that any society can normalize horror if enough people benefit from it or are simply indifferent. That fame doesn't equal freedom. That survival isn't the same as living. That courage can exist, even in the most hopeless circumstances. They also teach us about resilience. These were people who faced the worst humanity could offer, and sometimes found ways to maintain their dignity, their humanity, even their hope. They made friendships in cells. They found love despite being property. They fought not just for survival, but for the memory that they existed, that they mattered. Every gladiator who stepped into the arena was both a victim and a survivor. They had no good choices, only terrible ones, and slightly less terrible ones. They made the best of circumstances that should never have existed. So tonight, when you're safe in your comfortable life, remember them. The ones who fought, the ones who died, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't. The famous champions and the unnamed rookies killed in their first fight. Remember that they were real, that their suffering was real, that they lived and died in a world that saw them as entertainment, and they deserve to be remembered as more than that. The gladiators are gone. The arena is silent. But the questions they raise about power, violence, entertainment, and human dignity, those remain as relevant as ever. We are not Rome, but we are human, and humans haven't changed as much as we'd like to believe. The gladiators remind us of what we're capable of, both the worst and occasionally the best. Their story ends in the sand and ruins, but the lessons, if we're willing to learn them, those endure. Avenue. We who remember salute you.